Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western Literary Canon out loud. Today we proceed to Journal Collection number 45, and this dates from the year 1854. Emerson will turn 51 this year, and as always, when we start these journal collections, we start with an editorial biography update of sorts. So I'll read that. Mr. Emerson seems to have given no course of lectures in Boston in this year, but in January gave 5 lectures in Philadelphia. 1. Norsemen or English Influence in Civilization. 2. Has a question mark. 3. Poetry and English Poetry, much of this printed later as Poetry and Imagination in Letters and Social Aims. 4. Manners, question mark, or Behavior. 5. France or Urbanity. An abstract of the last is given by Mr. Cabot in his memoir, Volume 2, Appendix F, pages 755 to 757. In the same month he lectured in New York City, and in many towns in that state, and in New Jersey, and last in Detroit. February 1st found him in Michigan, whence he went to lecture in Chicago and its neighborhood, also in Milwaukee and Beloit, and on his homeward way in towns in New York. End note. January 1st, 1854. At Jackson, Michigan, Mr. Davis, I believe, a lawyer of Detroit, said to me on coming out of the lecture room, "Mr. Emerson, I see that you never learned to write from any book." Memorandum: an autobiography to write Dr. Gramiel Bradford's lines, written at the bottom of my schoolboy poem on solitude, Dr. Bradford being then usher in the Latin school. There is nobody in Washington who can explain this Nebraska business to the people, nobody of weight, and nobody of any importance on the bad side. It is only done by Douglas and his accomplices, by calculation on the brutal ignorance of the people, upon the wretched masses of Pennsylvania, Indiana, Illinois, Kentucky, and so on, people who can't read or know anything beyond what the village Democrat tells them. But what effrontery it required to fly in the face of what's supposed settled law, and how it shows that we have no guards whatever, and that there is no proposition whatever that is too audacious to be offered us by the Southerner. I found in Washington that the world was laid down in large lots. The member of Congress there said that up in the pine country the trees were so large, and so many of them, that a man could not walk in the forest, and it was necessary to wade up the streams. Dr. Welsh at LaSalle told me that the prairie grass there was over the tops of the carriages, or higher than the head of a man riding on horseback, so that really a man not accustomed to the prairie could easily get lost in the grass. Editor's note. Of this trip Mr. Emerson in a letter to Carlyle said, "I went out northwest to great countries which I had not visited before, rode one day, fault of broken railroads, in a sleigh 65 miles through the snow by Lake Michigan, seeing how prairies and oak openings look in winter, to reach Milwaukee. The world there was done up in larger lots, as a settler told me. The farmer, as he is now a colonist and has drawn from his local necessities great stores of energy, is interesting and makes the heroic age for Wisconsin. He lives on venison and quails. I was made much of as the only man of the pen within 500 miles, and by rarity worth more than venison and quails." End note. Meters. I amuse myself often, as I walk, with humming the rhythm of the decasyllabic quatrain, or other rhythms. I find a wonderful charm, heroic and especially deep pathetic or plaintive in cadences, and say to myself, "Ah, happy, if one could fill these small measures with words approaching to the power of these beats." The man thinks he can know this or that by words and writing. It can only be known or done organically. He must plunge into the universe and live in its forms, sink to rise. None any work can frame unless himself become the same. The first men saw heavens and earth, saw noble instruments of noble souls. We see railroads, banks, and mills, and we pity their poverty. There was as much creative force then as now, but it made globes instead of water closets. Each sees what he makes. Realism. We shall pass for what we are. Do not fear to die because you have not done your task. Whenever a noble soul comes, the audience awaits, and he is not judged by his performance, but by the spirit of his performance. When you hide something, we see that you hide something and usually see what you hide. There is always admittance for you to the great, whispered the muse, for the nobles wish to be more noble. There are no finalities in nature. Everything is streaming. The Torricellian tube was thought to have been made of vacuum, but no, over the mercury is the vapor of mercury, and the mysterious ether too enters as readily through the pores of glass as through chimney of a volcano. If I come to the stoppages, it is that I am wanting. To the wise navigator, beyond even the polar ice is the Polinia, or open water, a vast expanse. Realism in literature. I have no fear but that the reality I love will yet exist in literature. I do not go to any pope or president for my list of books. I read what I like. I learn what I do not already know. Only those above me can give me this. They also do as I, read only such as they know more than they. Thus we all depend at last on the few heads, or the one head that is nearest to the stars, nearest to the fountains of all science, and knowledge runs steadily down from class to class, down to the lowest people, from the highest, as water does. The simplest forms of botany, as lichens, are alike all over the globe. The lichens of Sweden and Brazil and Massachusetts are the same. So is it with the simple and the grand characters among men. They do not hold of climate, and so of the grand ideas of religion and morals. Vyasa and Swedenborg and Pythagoras see the same thing. Would you know a man's thoughts? Look at the circle of his friends, and you know all he likes to think of. Well, is the life of the Boston patrician so desirable, when you see the graceful fools who make all his company? 'Tis certain, as so many writers agree, there are two nations in England, but it is not the poor and the rich, as Disraeli the Jew very nationally thinks, nor Normans and Saxons, as Turner believes. These are each always becoming the other, but they are the two complexions or two styles of mind, one the practical finality class, and the other the perceptive class with minds open as the sea, apprehensive, faithful, and always gathering and transmitting down to the whole chain of inferior intelligences the heavenly fluid. Editor's Note: Mr. Emerson, at the call of the Anti-Slavery Society of New York, made an address there on the anniversary of Webster's 7th of March speech in Congress in 1850, in which he abandoned the Wilmot Proviso against the encroachment of slavery and justified the fugitive slave law. His quote-unquote fall, as the friends of freedom in their bitter sorrow called it. See Miscellanies, page 215, and Whittier's poem Ichabod. After his return to Concord, he wrote to a friend. March 14th. I came home near 3 weeks ago with good hope to write a plea for the freedom addressed to my set, which of course, like a divinity collegian's first sermon, was to exhaust the subject and moral science generally. But I fared much as these young gentlemen do, got no answer to my passionate queries, nothing but the echo of my own cries, and had to carry to New York a makeshift instead of an oracle. Yet I am still so foolish as to believe again that the thing I wished can be done, and I shall not cease to try after time. End note. At New York Tabernacle, on the 7th of March, I saw the great audience with dismay, and told the bragging secretary that I was most thankful to those who stayed at home. Every auditor was a new affliction, and if all had stayed away by rain or preoccupation, I had been best pleased. Majority. Alas for the majority, that old inevitable dupe and victim! What a dreary Iliad of woes it goes wailing and mad withal. Some dog of a Cleon or Robespierre or Douglas is always riding it to ruin. Culture teaches to omit the unnecessary word and to say the greatest things in the simplest way. Then there's a short French quotation without any translation. The lesson of these days is the vulgarity of wealth. We know that wealth will vote for the same thing which the worst and meanest of the people vote for. Wealth will vote for rum, will vote for tyranny, will vote for slavery, will vote against the ballot, will vote against international copyright, will vote against schools, colleges, or any high direction of public money. Plainly, Boston does not wish liberty, and can only be pushed and tricked into a rescue of a slave. Its attitude as loving liberty is affected and theatrical. Do not then force it to assume a false position which it will not maintain. Rather, let the facts appear, and leave it to the natural aggressions and familiarities of the beast it loves, until it gets well bitten and torn by the dear wolf. Perchance it may not be too late to turn and kill its deceiver. The invisible gas that we breathe in this room, we know, if pent, has an elasticity that will lift the Appalachian range as easily as a scrap of down, and a thought carries nations of men and ages of time on its shoulders. Henry Thoreau charged Blake, if he could not do hard tasks, to take the soft ones, and when he liked anything, if it was only a picture or a tune, to stay by it, find out what he liked, and draw that sense or meaning out of it, and do that. Harden it somehow, and make it his own. Blake thought and thought on this, and wrote afterwards to Henry that he had got his first glimpse of heaven. Henry was a good physician. Ah, yet, though all the world forsake, though fortune clip my wings, I will not cramp my heart, nor take half views of men and things. Let Whig and Tory stir their blood, there must be stormy weather, but for some true result of good all parties work together. This whole wide earth of light and shade come out a perfect round. Tennyson. Science. Quote, in the government of states, the power of science makes part of the science of power. Napoleon. Plotinus did not hastily disclose to every one the syllogistic necessities which were latent in his discourse. Quote, I endeavored to show, says Porphyry, that intellections are external to intellect. The following sentences are all from Plotinus. All the gods are venerable and beautiful, and their beauty is immense. Nothing that is truly beautiful externally is internally deformed. Of intellect. It is ours when we use it, but not ours when we do not use it. Necessity is in intellect, but persuasion in soul. Intellect is not at all in want of another life, or of other things. God is not external to anyone, but is present with all things, though they are ignorant that he is so. The existence of evil and malignant men does not depend on themselves or on men. It indicates the virulence that still remains uncured in the universe, uncured and corrupting, and hurling out these pestilent rats and tigers, and men rat-like and wolf-like. Synesius said, quote, the calamities of nations are the banquets of evil demons. They hurl out now a soldier, now a Jesuit, and now an editor, a glozing Democrat, as an instrument of the evil which they inflict on mankind. To the rapping tables I say as Percy to his Kate, I well believe thou wilt not utter what thou dost not know, and so far will I trust thee, gentle wood. The human race are a near-sighted people. We can see well into the past, we can see well into the dark ages, we can guess shrewdly into the future. Every man forms some probable sketch of the politics and mechanics and morals to which men tend. but that which is rolled up and muffled in impenetrable folds is today. See in Evelyn's Diary, Volume 1, page 147, the story of the unquenchable lamp found in a sepulchre in the time of Paul III. Quote, "The true and mature spirit of the age always elects an advocate who does not look backward with longing eyes, and who always, as the world thinks, arises an hour too soon." Wall. Nature herself is to be imitated, not an artist, said Eupompus to Lysippus. Excellence is thy aim. Quoted by Mr. Wall from Vasari. Ut pictura poesis. Quote, "Painting is silent poetry. Poetry, speaking painting," is ascribed to Simonides. Hallam. Hallam leaves out all those writers I read. His Latimer is not the good bishop, but I know not what writer of Latin. Giordano Bruno, Behmen, von Helmont, Digby, Lord Herbert, George Herbert, Henry Moore, Swedenborg. In vain you look in his pages for adequate mention of these men, for whose sake I want a history of literature. All these he passes or names them for something else than their real merit, namely their originality in faithful striving to write a line of the real history of the world. The Englishman is with difficulty ideal. Shakespeare even is so exact and surrendered on the whole to the tastes of an audience, and so far from the world-building, freedom, and simplicity of the Oriental sages. William Law deals with English method, tries to make the wild inspirations of Behmen grind a barrel organ. Thomas Taylor masquerades as Alexandrian Greek. Greaves and Lane tried hard to be spiritualist, but the English coat was too straight for them. Browning is ingenious. Tennyson is the more public soul, walks on the ecliptic road, the path of gods and souls, and what he says is the expression of his contemporaries. Like Burke or Mirabeau, he says better than all men think. Like these men, he is content to think and speak a sort of king's speech, embodying the sense of well-bred successful men, and by no means of the best and highest men. He speaks the sense of the day, and not the sense of grand men, the sense of the first class, identical in all ages. But for poetic expression, it is plain that now and then a man hits, by the help of his sensibility, the right key, and so speaks that everybody around him or after him, aiming to talk of and to the times, is forced to quote him, or falls inevitably into his manner and phrase. It is like Mr. Whitworth's famous dividing machine, which can divide or mark off a metallic bar with mathematical precision to the millionth of an inch. Sir Christopher Wren said, "Bernini showed me on 5 little pieces of paper his facade of the Louvre. I would have given my skin for a copy of it." Louis XIV, however, did not build it, but accepted another plan. Shall we judge the country by the majority or by the minority? Certainly by the minority. The mass are animal, in state of pupillage, and nearer to the chimpanzee. We are used as brute atoms until we think. Then we instantly use self-control and control others. In astronomy, vast distance, but we never go into a foreign system. Of reading. I once interpreted the law of Adrastia, that he who had any truth should be safe from harm until another period, as pronounced of originators. But I have discovered that the profound satisfactions, which I take to be the sentence of Adrastia itself, belong to the truth received from another soul, come to us in reading as well as in thinking. 'Tis curious that one should owe such fine things to Bonaparte. But there has been no better critic, even literary critic, in these days, and Carlyle must measure his pretensions, not by Jeffrey or Mackintosh, not even by Coleridge or Goethe, but by Bonaparte. The best example I think of at this moment of Bonaparte's is contained in Causeries du Lundi, Vol.8, page 310. Then there's an exceedingly long French passage here with no translation. Man as his credence. Swedenborg saw gravitation to be only an external of the irresistible attractions of affection and faith. Realism. I never take them as theists or as spiritualists because they say they are, but the fame of their thought is determined by their credence, and if you listen wisely, you will hear in their very oration on deity the confession of a stiff and indigent anthropomorphism. What they say about spiritualism is all copy-slip piety. Those who stay away from the election think that one vote will do no good. 'Tis but one step more to think one vote will do no harm. Do you say that to man on horseback it makes no difference whether he believes that body makes soul or that soul makes body? Oh, but the difference is vast. In the better case, he believes that man and horse and nature exist to the highest end, to the highest use only, and not to foppery at all. The believer always feels himself held up by certain eternal threads, which spin and hold from deity down, whilst the skeptic class is always peeping after his underpinning. Drink, hear my counsel, my son, that the world fret thee not. Though the heart bleed, let thy lips laugh like the wine cup. Is thy soul hurt? Yet dance with the viol strings. Thou learnest no secret until thou knowest friendship, since to the unsound no heavenly knowledge comes. Hafitz 2:71. What's the use of telegraph? What of newspapers? What of waiting to know what the convention in Ohio, what that in Michigan is ready to do? To know how men feel in Wisconsin, in Illinois, and Minnesota, I wait for no mails, I read no telegraphs. I ask my own heart if those men are made as I am, if they breathe the same air, eat the same wheat or cornbread, have wives and children. I know their resentment will boil at this legislation. I know it will boil until this wrong is righted. The interest of labor, the self-respect of mankind that engages man not to be to man a wolf, secures their everlasting hostility to this shame. Quote, it is one of the traits of a noble citizen to be able to see one layer of public opinion through another, or if he do not see it, to trust in God that it must be there, and act accordingly. Lieber. England. The women have no vanity. The English wish that none but opulent men should represent them. Dumont contrasts the reserve approaching timidity of the Englishman with the self-confidence of the French. If 100 persons were stopped in the streets at London, and as many at Paris, and each individual invited to undertake the government, 99 would accept the offer at Paris, and 99 refuse it at London. Editor's note. Mr. Emerson enjoyed the following anecdote of an encounter between the president of the Fitchburg Railroad and an Irish track-layer whom he tried to correct. Whitmore, you must dig these sleepers out so-and-so. Paddy, I shall do no such thing. Whitmore, but you must and shall. Who the devil are you? I am Mr. Whitmore, the president of this road. You, Mr. Whitmore? You go to hell. My friend, that's the last place I wish to go. And it's the last place you will to go. Hallam is a proof of the English prowess today. A good mathematician, the historian of the Middle Ages and of English liberty, he has written his history of European literature for 3 centuries. A vast performance attempting a judgment of every book. He has not genius, but has a candid mind. The Englishman is too apparent. The judgments are all dated from London, and that expansive element which creates literature is steadily denied. Plato is resisted, and Giordano Bruno, Bayman, Swedenborg, Donne. The Quakers, or whosoever contains the seed of liberty, power, and truth, is under ban. Yet he lifts himself to own better than almost any the greatness of Shakespeare, and he shows so much more power of appreciating Milton than Johnson, and shows such true gentlemanlike and loving esteem for good books that I respect him. Shall I say that I often find a nearer coincidence, and find my own opinions and criticisms anticipated? But at last, and there's a short Latin quotation, I'll try to pronounce it, talus cum sis utanum noster essis. I regret to have all this learning and worth throw a Birmingham ballot, to see England go as by gravitation in her best and noblest sons always for materialism. Mackintosh, Jeffrey, Southey, Hallam, the last the best, vote inevitably for church and state. Quote, "Is truth ever barren?" Then do not question the utility of the lovers of ethical or metaphysical laws. What a notable greengrocer was spoiled to make Macaulay. Solitude. Now and then a man exquisitely made can and must live alone, but coop up most men and you undo them. The king lived and eat in hall with men and understood men at Selden. Here follows two quotations, one from Hobbes and another a long one in French by a man named Roederer. And then one after that on the next page by Bonaparte. All these are in French except the Hobbes one I believe was in Latin. Yes, that's true. England makes what a step from Dr. Johnson to Carlyle. What wealth of thought and science, what expansion of views and profounder resources does the genius and performance of this last imply? If she can make another step as large, what new ages open? May. If Minerva offered me a gift and an option, I would say, give me continuity. I am tired of scraps. I do not wish to be a literary or intellectual chiffonnier. Away with this Jew's rag bag of ends and tufts of brocade, velvet, and cloth of gold. Let me spin some yards or miles of helpful twine, a clue to lead one kingly truth, a cord to bind wholesome and belonging facts. The Asmodean feet be mine, to spin my sand heaps into twine. Change your front. England does not wish revolution or to befriend radicals. Therefore, you say, England must fall because its moderate, mixed, aristocratico-liberal or finality politics will put it in antagonism with the republicanism when that comes in. Yes, but England has many moods, a war class as well as nobles and merchants. It begun with poverty and piracy and trade, and has always those elements latent, as well as gold coaches and heraldry. It has only to let its fop and bankers succumb for a time, and its sailors, ploughmen, and bullies fall to the front. It will prove a stout buccaneer again, and weather the storm. England can only fall by suicide. English the best of actual nations, and so you see the poor best you have yet got. The reason why you visit England is as the epitome of modern times, and the Rome of today. I think the English have a certain solidarity, not an unaccountable sprinkling of great men here in the midst of a population of dunces, not a talent for this or that thing, as an idiot is skilful sometimes in bees or in herbs, but what they have learned they record and incorporate, and have multitudes sufficiently taught to keep and use it. What Newton knew is now possessed by the corps of astronomers at Greenwich, and Slough, and Edinburgh, and Glasgow. Hutton, Herschel, Harvey, Hooke, Dalton, Hunter, Hobbes, Burke, Berkeley, Bentham were men of ideas. Editor's note. Here follow passages on English quote-unquote solidarity printed in English Traits, and as illustrations anecdotes and sayings of Nelson drawn probably from Southey's biography. End note. My Englishman said, quote, "Oh, it is very healthy there. They have quantities of children and all that sort of thing." End quote. I read that in the gardens of heaven, when the children came, the beds of flowers assumed an unusual splendor. Quote, at their entrance seemed to express joy by their increasing splendor. Here follow lines later used in May Day. See Poems, pages 173 and 174. As if time brought a new relay of shining maidens every May, and summer came to ripen maids to a beauty that not fades. Those who painted angels and nativities and descents from the cross were also writing biographies and satires, though they knew it not. We affirm and affirm, but neither you nor I know the value of what we say. The history of humanity is no hopping squib, but all its discoveries in science, religion, and art are consecutive and correlated, every discovery leading to a new discovery. Good out of evil. He that roars for liberty faster binds the tyrant's power, and the tyrant's cruel glee forces on their freer hour. Fill the can and fill the cup. All the windy ways of men are but dust that rises up and is lightly laid again. Tennyson. The truth that flies the flowing can will haunt the vacant cup. Tennyson. Thoreau thinks 'tis immoral to dig gold in California, immoral to leave creating value and go to augmenting the representative of value, and so altering and diminishing real value, and that, of course, the fraud will appear. I conceive that work to be as innocent as any other speculating. Every man should do what he can, and he was created to augment some real value, and not for a speculator. When he leaves or postpones, as most men do, his proper work, and adopts some short or cunning method, as of watching markets or farming in any manner the ignorance of people, as in buying by the acre to sell by the foot, he is fraudulent, he is malefactor so far, and is bringing society to bankruptcy. But nature watches over all this too, and turns this malfeasance to some good. The world is divided on the fame of the Virgin Mary. The Catholics call her Mother of God. The skeptics think her the natural mother of an admirable child. But the last agree with the first in hailing the moral perfections of his character and the immense benefit his life has exerted and exerts. In England we are treading in the footmarks of Alfred, of Bacon, of Shakespeare, of Newton, of Milton, of Raleigh, of Nelson, of Moore, of whatever is sublime in thought or in determination. The credit of all the judges on earth stands on the probity and common sense shown by a few judges in their decisions. Alfred judges wisely. Coke, Bracton, Moore, Lord Mansfield, Judge Parsons, Judge Marshall use original sense and mother wit, and all mankind are impressed with the beauty and splendor of this office, and hundreds of mediocre judges who never dare use original power, but govern themselves by precedent, only live in safety and credit on the merits of these few. Piety and theology, too, have but few mountains, and all the arts. Proclus thinks that the Pythian oracle concerning Socrates meant that, quote, not he who possesses scientific knowledge, but the good alone possesses an exempt transcendency, end quote. That is, he has the sense not to be, quote unquote, a man of information, such as Charles Lamb dreaded. I am here to represent humanity. It is by no means necessary that I should live, but it is by all means necessary that I should act rightly. If there is danger, I must face it. I tremble. What of that? So did he who said, quote, it is my body trembles, out of knowing into what dangers my spirit will carry it. End quote. Cromwell's English judges sent to Scotland administered justice better than ever before or since. The old Scotch judge said, quote, there was no great merit in their impartiality. They were a kinless pack. End quote. English antagonism, or two nations. Side by side, the fierce aristocracy conserves, and the man of equity and mercy reforms. Eldon and Romilly, the King and Clarkson. Romilly, a glorious minority in his age, an example he of the domestic Englishman. He could not sustain the loss of his wife, and killed himself. He gave the real reason when he refused an offered seat in Parliament, or at a public dinner. His religion on the same low footing as the rest, he thanks God for his money and his social position, like Pepys. Dr. Parr is no sentimentalist and knows the full value of the silver he stoutly gives. They are not dodgers nor dough-faces, yet the votes on Romilly's bills show strong wickedness. 7 bishops vote the inhumanities, just as the dignified clergy here uniformly cast a dastardly vote. It does seem as if a vow of silence coupled with systematic lessons might teach women the outline and new direction of the philosopher, but they give themselves no leisure to hear. They are impatient to talk. Editor's note. On August 15th, Mr. Emerson delivered an address at Williams College, Williamstown, Massachusetts, on the invitation of the Adelphi Union on his favorite subject for such occasions, the privilege and the duty of the scholar. Matter was probably drawn from this address for The Scholar and The Man of Letters, lectures and biographical sketches, and many leaves are torn out of this journal, which probably did duty on that occasion when there was not time to copy them. What follows remained among Mr. Emerson's manuscripts. End note. The scholars are an organic caste or class in the state. Men toil and sweat, earn money, save, consent to servile compliance, all to raise themselves out of the necessity of being menial and overborne. For this they educate their children to expiate their own shortcomings. Art, libraries, colleges, churches attest the respect to what is ulterior, to theism, to thought, which superexist by the same elemental necessity as flame above fire. Our Anglo-Saxon society is a great industrial corporation. It sees very well the rules indispensable to success. You must make trade everything. Trade is not to know friends, or wife, or child, or country. But this walking ledger knows that though he, poor fellow, has put off his royal robes, somewhere the noble humanity survives, and this consoles him for the brevity and meanness of his street life. He has not been able to hide from himself that his devotion to means is an absurdity, is, for a livelihood, to defeat the ends of living, and it is out of the wish to preserve sanity, to establish the minor propositions, without throwing overboard the major proposition, how not to lose the troop, and the care for the baggage, that he has said, quote, "Let there be schools, a clergy, art, music, poetry, the college." End quote. But if the youth, looking over the college wall at the houses and the lives of the founders, make the mistake of imitating them, they may well say, "We paid you that you might not be a merchant. We bought and sold that you might not buy and sell, that reveal the reason of trade. We did not want apes of us, but guides and commanders." This atheism of the priest, this prose in the poet, this cowardice in succumbing before material greatness, is a treason one knows not how to excuse. Let the scholar stand by his order. I wish the college not to make you rich or great, but to show you that the material pomps and possessions, that all the feats of our civility, were the thoughts of good heads. The shopkeeper's yardstick is measured from a degree of the meridian. All powers by which a man lays his hand on those advantages are intellectual. It is thoughts that make men great and strong. The material results are bubbles, filled only and colored by this divine air. But this great ocean, which in itself is always equal and full in regard to men, ebbs and flows. Now for us it is an ebb. It is the vulgarity of this country. It came to us with the commerce out of England, to believe that naked wealth, unrelieved by any use or design, is merit. Who is accountable for this materialism? Who but the scholars? When the poets do not believe in their own poetry, How should the bats and the swine? The world is always as bad as it dares to be, and if the majority are evil, it is because the minority are not good. If the heathen rage, it is because the Christian doubts. People wish to be amused, and they summon a lecturer or a poet to read to them for an hour. And so they do with a priest. They want leaders. Intellect is the thread on which all their worldly prosperity is strung. Yet I speak badly for the scholar if I seem to limit myself to secular and outward benefit. All that is urged by the saint for the superiority of faith over works is as truly urged for the highest state of intellectual perception over any performance. I, too, am an American, and value practical ability. I delight in people who can do things. I prize talent, perhaps no man more. But I think of the wind and not of the weathercocks. Editor's note. The following paragraph and others scattered through this part of the journal were very possibly notes from the address. End note. Pythagoras deserves his fame with scholars because we never heard the severity of literary discipline but from him. The severity of military discipline is familiar and is justified by men's easy belief in the reality of those values it subserves. Severity of mechanical toil we understand, 7 years' apprenticeship and 12 hours a day, but literary toil, so few men have literary faculty, that these few are not sustained by the expectation and loyalty of the community, and held to the most severe of disciplines proper to the highest of arts, and law is severity of teaching. Plato, but a school had he. What wealth of perception in Plotinus, Proclus, Jamblichus, Porphyry, Synesius! There is no meter of mind whereon readily, as on our thermometer, we may say he had 10 degrees, 20 degrees, 100 degrees. French. Heine thinks the office of the French language to test the sense that is in any philosophy or science. Translate it into French, and you dispel instantly all the smoke and sorcery, and it passes for what it is. English whim. I admire as proof of their plenteousness of nature the perpetual fun of antagonism. They are lions to fight, but it is for some old mummy of obsolete ages. Claverhouse, a smooth fop, slashes like a steam engine, and Lord Nelson is a little boy captain of the most absurd appearance. Mr. Woodward, at a loss what to attack, writes against the Lord's Prayer. The most daring dragons in the universe, the island abounds in old women in men's clothes, screaming like seasick females in a rough sea. The fathers made the blunder in the convention of the ordinance of the 10th of July, 1787, to adopt population as basis of representation, and count only 3/5 of the slaves, and to concede the reclamation of fugitive slaves for the consideration of the prohibition that, quote, there shall be neither slavery nor involuntary servitude in the said Northwest Territory, unless in punishment of crimes, end quote. The bed of the Ohio River was the line agreed on east of the Mississippi. In 1820, when the new territory west of the Mississippi was to be dealt with, no such natural line offered, and a parallel of latitude was adopted, and 36 degrees 30 north was agreed on as equitable. The fathers made the fatal blunder in agreeing to this false basis of representation, and to this criminal complicity of restoring fugitive slaves, and the splendor of the bribe, namely the magnificent prosperity of America from 1787, is their excuse before God and men for the crime. They ought never to have passed the ordinance. They ought to have refused it at the risk of making no union, and if no solution could be had, it would have been better than two nations, one free and one slaveholding, should have started into existence at once. The bribe, if they foresaw the prosperity we have seen, was one to dazzle common sense, and I do not wonder that the most men now excuse and applaud it. But crime brings punishment, always so much crime, so much ruin. A little crime, a minor penalty, a great crime, a great ruin, And now, after 60 years, the poison has crept into every vein and every artery of the state. Our policy is too low. A high, true, abstract policy, a law of equity resting on love of men, does not provoke blind fury, but respect, and pause, and conviction, and tears of love and gratitude. The narrow, tricksy, time-serving policy is met by the like of trick and cant, and is hated and resisted. William Penn and Clarkson, William J. and Gerrit Smith, and each partisan abolitionist, as fast as he is seen to be rooted in an idea of the human mind, and to have come into the world pledged to spend and be spent for something not selfish, not geographical, but human and divine, has the respect and tears of gratitude of mankind. This age is Swedenborg's. I have said the ideas of the age so shine that even the nightmares, as they go, can see them. It is notable that all the rappers and mesmerists agree in a subjective religion. All agree that the departing human soul finds such a world as it left, sees the associates and acts according to what it is educated to be, repudiate the Hebrew ideas and embrace the subjective philosophy of the Saxons, that the soul makes its own world. Kant. We only use different names. He calls it attar of rose, and I call it bilgewater. The English and the Americans can't sadly. They cover over their greediness with a pretended zeal for religion or patriotism, and strew sugar on a bottled spider. Choate's letter to the New England Society in 1851, pretending that the stern old Puritans of 1620 would spurn the rose-pink sentimentalism of resisting the Fugitive Slave Bill, is an example. Copy-slip morality. They think the Bible a better sort of copal varnish. The escort of friends with which each spirit walks through time. This is the end of part 1 of Emerson's journal collection number 45, dating from the year 1854, when the author was 51 years old. Thank you for listening.